I might hold the world record for the fastest a brand new, self-appointed HOA president ever lost her entire HOA, her dignity, and her house. The best part? She handed me the dynamite and the matches herself, all because I refused to pay a fee to access my own lake. How did it all go down? It's a pretty crazy story. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from, because you are not going to believe the level of entitlement we're dealing with today. This suburban warfare saga got so out of hand that the police were called, but the person they ended up cautioning wasn't me. It was the woman in the pristine white tennis skirt who thought she ruled the water, when in reality, she was just a tenant in my world. It all started when I inherited my great-grandfather's legacy. That sounds grand, but on paper it looked like a bit of an administrative nightmare. He'd been a shrewd but quiet investor back in the 1940s and had bought a significant parcel of land, including a small, spring-fed lake people around here just called Clear Lake. Instead of developing it into a massive subdivision, he'd sectioned off 10 large lots around the shoreline, built modest but solid homes on them, and leased them out. He kept the lake itself and the surrounding 50 acres of woodland as his own private reserve. Over the decades, these leases were passed down, renewed, and managed by a sleepy family trust that basically just cashed the checks. My father had managed it before me, and he was a hands-off kind of guy. As long as the taxes were paid and the tenants didn't burn the houses down, he let things be. When he passed, the entire portfolio, including the trust, the woodland, and the legal ownership of all 10 leased properties, fell into my lap. I'm a civil engineer, so blueprints and property lines are my native language, but managing tenants was a whole new world. I decided to spend the first year just observing, leaving the old system in place while I got the lay of the land, literally. I decided the best way to do that was to use the small, original cottage on the property that my great-grandfather had kept for himself. It was set back from the lake, mostly hidden by the woods. It was rustic, but it was mine, and more importantly, it was private. For the first few months, it was idyllic. I spent my weekends mapping the property, assessing the condition of the docks, and generally enjoying the peace. I met a few of the other residents on my walks. They were mostly quiet, older folks who had been there for years. They'd give a friendly wave. We'd exchange pleasantries about the weather, and that was that. They all seemed to understand and respect the long-standing arrangement. Then, about 4 months in, I saw the new Lexus SUV for the first time. It was a pearl white RX, the kind that seems to be surgically attached to a certain type of suburban woman. It was parked in front of the largest house on the lake, Lot 1, the one with the most waterfront footage. The lease on that one had just turned over a year before I took over, a fact that would become critically important. The driver of this Lexus was a woman I would come to know as Brenda. My first official introduction to Brenda was an ambush. I was down at the edge of the lake, checking the integrity of an old stone retaining wall my great-grandfather had built, when I heard the crunch of gravel behind me. "Excuse me," a voice dripped with manufactured authority. I turned. Standing there was a woman in her late 40s, dressed in expensive athletic wear that had clearly never seen a bead of sweat. Her hair was a fortress of blonde highlights and hairspray, and her face was a mask of polite condescension. Beside her stood a man who could only be her husband, Richard, a man whose spine seemed to have been surgically removed and replaced with a checkbook. He looked deeply uncomfortable, like he was perpetually apologizing for the space his wife took up in the world. Brenda's eyes weren't looking at me, but rather past me, at the ancient, weathered stone in my hand. "We don't allow residents to alter the community-facing infrastructure without a formal proposal to the board," she announced, as if she were addressing a slow-witted child. I just blinked, holding the rock. "The board?" I asked, a genuine question. "Yes, the Clear Lake Homeowners Association," she said, puffing up slightly. "I'm Brenda, the president. This is my husband, Richard. He's the treasurer." Richard offered a weak, apologetic smile. I found this fascinating, because, as far as I knew from the trust documents which governed the entire area, No such organization existed. I wasn't aware there was an HOA, I said, my tone still neutral. Brenda's smile tightened. Well, there is. We formed it 6 months ago to maintain the property values and aesthetic standards of our community. It was a bit of a mess before we stepped in. Some of the older residents had really let things slide. She eyed my rustic, unpainted cottage in the distance with a look of profound disapproval. I decided to play along for a moment. I see. And what aesthetic standard am I violating by inspecting this wall? You need to submit a plan, she said, waving a dismissive hand. And before you do any more work, you'll need to get registered with the association. There's a $500 initiation fee and monthly dues of $200. It covers landscaping for the common areas, lake maintenance, and our legal fund. I almost laughed. Legal fund? Against whom? Themselves? And the common areas would be what exactly? I asked, gesturing vaguely at the forest around us. Brenda's gaze flickered. The entryway, the lakefront path, all of it. I am the owner of that entryway. The lakefront path, all of it. Right, I said slowly, placing the stone back into the wall. I'll have to look into that. I don't believe my lease mentions an HOA. Her expression soured instantly. The veneer of polite neighborliness evaporated. All residents are required to be members. It's not optional. We had a vote. It was unanimous. I knew for a fact that at least 3 of the older tenants hadn't even heard of it. Old Mr. Henderson in Lot 7 had specifically told me last week how much he disliked the new bossy woman in the big house. Well, Brenda, I said, giving her my most non-committal smile. It was interesting meeting you. You and Richard have a nice day. I turned and walked back toward my cottage, feeling her eyes burning a hole in my back. I could practically hear the gears grinding in her head. She had just met an immovable object, but she didn't know it yet. She thought I was just another resident to be steamrolled. She had absolutely no idea that she had just tried to charge the landlord rent. The war had begun, but only one of us had the full map of the battlefield. The first official salvo from Brenda, HOA president for life, arrived a week later. It was a crisp, cream-colored envelope, personally placed in my mailbox, which was itself a violation of federal law, a tiny detail I filed away for later. Inside was a professionally printed letter on what I could only describe as aspirational letterhead. The Clear Lake Homeowners Aesthetics Association. The logo was a truly awful clip art graphic of a swan forming a heart with its neck. The letter, signed with a flourishing, self-important signature by Brenda M. President, detailed my supposed violations. Apparently, my cottage's rustic, her word, appearance was out of compliance with the newly ratified Community Aesthetic Code. It cited the unpainted wood siding, the lack of ornamental shrubbery, and the visible clutter of my canoe leaning against a tree. It gave me 30 days to submit a remediation plan, which had to include a full exterior repainting from an approved palette of beiges naturally, a landscaping proposal from a licensed contractor, and the construction of a storage shed for my nautical equipment. The letter ended with a reminder that my $500 initiation fee was now past due, and that a late penalty of $50 had been applied. It was magnificent, a masterpiece of unwarranted authority. She was essentially trying to fine the guy whose family had owned the land since before her grandparents were born for not conforming to rules she invented last Tuesday. I didn't respond. Not a word. In my world of engineering and contracts, you don't engage with belligerent nonsense. You document it and prepare a counter-strategy. I took the letter, scanned it, and placed it in a new folder on my laptop labeled simply, Brenda. I then spent the weekend not painting my house beige, but driving to the county records office. I pulled the original plat maps from the 1940s, the deed of sale to my great-grandfather, and every single zoning ordinance and modification on record for the parcel since. The result was a beautiful, unbroken chain of ownership, residing solely with my family's trust. The land wasn't a subdivision. It was legally classified as a single large estate with multiple long-term leasehold tenants. An HOA had as much legal standing here as the Tooth Fairy. Armed with this, I felt a calm sense of purpose. This wasn't just a spat with a nosy neighbor anymore. This was about protecting my property and, by extension, the other tenants who were likely being bullied into submission. My next step was to talk to some of those other tenants. I started with Mr. Henderson in Lot 7, a kind widower in his 80s who had lived there for 40 years. I found him tending his prize-winning roses. "Afternoon, Mr. Henderson," I said. He looked up and smiled. "Ah, the new fella. Good to see you. How are you settling in?" I cut to the chase. "I'm doing well, thanks. But I wanted to ask you about this homeowners association." His smile vanished. A weary look clouded his eyes. "Her," he sighed, snipping a dead leaf with more force than necessary. "Brenda. She seems to think she's in charge," I offered. "She doesn't think it, son." "She is," he said, turning to face me. "At least, she acts like it. Showed up here last year, all smiles and casseroles. Next thing you know, she's calling a community meeting at her house. Me and a few others didn't go. Figured it was just a welcome party. Turns out that's when they voted to create the HOA. Only her husband and the couple from Lotters 3, the renters who are terrified of getting kicked out, were there. This was the smoking gun. The unanimous vote she'd boasted about was a sham, conducted with a tiny minority of residents, one of whom was her own husband. "She's been sending us letters too," he continued, his voice low. "Wants me to tear out these roses. Says they're non-native and disorderly. My wife planted these roses." A flicker of genuine anger crossed his face. "I've just been paying the dues to keep the peace. $200 a month. It's robbery. But at my age, I don't have the energy to fight." My blood began to boil, slowly and methodically. This wasn't about aesthetics for Brenda. It was about power and money. She was extorting elderly residents. I thanked Mr. Henderson, told him not to worry, and said I was looking into the matter. He just nodded sadly, as if he'd heard empty promises before. Brenda, however, was not content with a war of letters. My silent non-compliance was driving her mad. About 2 weeks after her first letter, I was out in my canoe, enjoying the morning quiet, when her voice shattered the peace, projected across the water by a megaphone. A megaphone! "Resident of Lot 11, she blared, her voice tinny and distorted. "Your watercraft is not registered with the association. Please return to shore immediately." I was in the middle of the lake. My lake. I just kept paddling. She repeated her demand, more shrilly this time. I ignored her. This, I knew, would be seen as an act of open rebellion. And I was right. The next afternoon, Richard, the spineless treasurer, appeared at my door, looking like a man being forced to deliver his own death sentence. He was clutching a clipboard. "Hi," he mumbled, avoiding my eyes. "Brenda sent me. This is your second notice of violation. And, a fine for unauthorized lake use." He tried to hand me a piece of paper. I didn't take it. I just looked at him. "Richard," I said, my voice calm but firm, "do you have any idea what the legal definition of extortion is?" He flinched as if I'd slapped him. "What? No, we're just trying to build a better community. By charging people to use a lake you don't own, based on rules from an association that has no legal authority?" "Richard, you're the treasurer. You're handling the money. You might want to think very, very carefully about what you're involved in." I let that sink in. I could see the panic in his eyes. He was a follower, a man clearly intimidated by his wife, but he wasn't stupid. The word extortion had landed like a brick. He mumbled something incoherent, turned, and practically fled back to his pearl-white Lexus. I knew then that I had created a fracture in her small empire. The treasurer was spooked. The war was escalating, and Brenda was about to make a very, very big mistake. She had no idea that I wasn't just some new guy in a rustic cabin. She was about to find out she'd been poking a hornet's nest with a very, very big stick, and I was just about done gathering my evidence. The 2 weeks that followed Richard's panicked retreat were a period of what I can only describe as a cold war on Clear Lake. Brenda's megaphone became a regular feature of my weekend mornings, a shrieking, tinny narration of my every supposed infraction. "The unapproved canoe is on the water again," she'd broadcast from her deck. "The resident of Lot 11 is performing unauthorized landscaping," she'd yell when I was pulling weeds near the shoreline. It was becoming background noise, the mating call of the suburban tyrant. Meanwhile, her enablers grew bolder. The couple in Lot 3, the young renters, started leaving little passive-aggressive notes on my door, typed out and printed, likely at Brenda's direction. "Friendly reminder: trash cans must be stored out of sight, per community guidelines." My trash cans were 50 yards into the woods, next to my cottage. They would have had to trespass significantly onto my unleased property to even see them. I photographed each note, dated it, and added it to the Brenda file, which was now growing into a formidable digital dossier. My allies, on the other hand, were beginning to stir. Mr. Henderson had apparently spoken to a few of the other long-term tenants. I started getting quiet visitors, folks who had lived on the lake for decades. They'd come by under the pretense of borrowing a cup of sugar or asking about the fishing. But the conversation always turned to Brenda. One woman, a sweet grandmother named Mrs. Pracken Gable from Lot 5, told me Brenda had tried to fine her because her grandchildren were being too loud while swimming. Another, a retired contractor from Lot 9, told me she demanded he use a specific, outrageously expensive company coincidentally owned by her cousin to repaint his trim. The stories were all the same: petty tyranny, financial demands, and a complete disregard for the way things had been for half a century. They were all afraid of rocking the boat, afraid of legal trouble, afraid of Brenda's relentless bullying energy. To each of them, I gave the same quiet advice: don't pay her another dime. Document everything. Just wait. My own preparations were nearing completion. My quiet weekends were spent not relaxing, but strategizing. I had the complete ownership history from the county. I had printed high-resolution satellite imagery of the entire property, with the legal boundaries of the trust land and the individual leasehold parcels clearly marked in red. I had copies of every single active lease agreement, including the one signed by Brenda and Richard. I had gone through their lease with a fine-tooth comb. It was the standard decades-old document the trust used, a simple agreement that granted them the right to inhabit the house on Lot 1 and reasonable enjoyment of the lake's recreational opportunities in common with other tenants. There was, of course, no mention of an HOA, no authority to form one, and certainly no right to charge fees, issue fines, or dictate aesthetic standards to anyone, least of all the actual landlord. The most beautiful clause, which I highlighted in yellow, explicitly stated that any and all disputes were to be handled through written communication with the trust's designated manager, me. She was in violation of her own lease. To top it all off, I had consulted with the family's longtime attorney, a sharp old man named Arthur who had worked with my father for years. He reviewed my file, a wry smile playing on his lips. "It's perfect," he chuckled. "She's built her own gallows. The trick, my boy, is to let her walk right up to them and put the noose on herself." The tipping point, the final glorious escalation, came on a Saturday morning. I had decided it was time to replace the small, rickety dock that serviced my personal cottage. It wasn't one of the 10 main docks for the leased houses. It was my own private one, set away in a small cove. I had the materials delivered: beautiful, sturdy cedar planks and posts. I had the county permit for repair and replacement. Not that I legally needed it on private property, but I wanted every single duck in a row. The moment the delivery truck left, Brenda went into DEFCON 1. I was maybe 3 posts into the installation when she came marching down the path, not with Richard this time, but with 2 other women I recognized as her compliant followers from other lots. She was holding a phone to her ear. "Yes, that's right, officer," she said, her voice dripping with false panic. "I'm the HOA president. There is a man here. He's not a resident. He's on our common property, and he's building an unauthorized structure and refusing to leave. He's been threatening us for weeks." I just kept working, sinking another post into the soft lake bed. My heart was beating a steady, calm rhythm. This was it. The moment Arthur had told me to wait for. She was putting on the noose. She hung up the phone with a triumphant smirk. "The police are on their way," she announced to me, her voice filled with vindication. "You are in a great deal of trouble. Trespassing, vandalism, we're going to have you removed and press full charges." "Okay, Brenda," I said calmly, not even looking at her. "You'd do that." Her face contorted with rage at my nonchalance. She was expecting fear, begging, compliance. She got none of it. Her allies looked less certain, glancing nervously between me, the placid lake, and Brenda's furious face. They were standing on the very edge of my property line, a fact I was keenly aware of. They were about to witness the spectacular implosion of the Clear Lake Homeowners Aesthetics Association and its president. The distant sound of a siren began to drift through the trees. Brenda's smile was predatory. It was the last time I would ever see her smile like that. The arrival of 2 county sheriff's deputies felt almost theatrical, their patrol cars crunching down the gravel path I just had graded a month prior. Brenda practically vibrated with excitement, her moment of ultimate validation at hand. She strode toward them, a commanding figure of righteous indignation. "Thank goodness you're here, officers," she began, her voice a carefully modulated blend of concern and authority. "I'm Brenda Miller, the president of the community HOA. This man," she pointed a perfectly manicured finger at me, where I was now leaning casually against a stack of cedar planks, "has been a nightmare. He's been trespassing on our community land for weeks, harassing residents. And now he's building this illegal structure without any permits or approval from the association." One of the deputies, a man with a tired, seen-it-all expression and a name tag that read Sutton, looked from Brenda to me to the dock posts. "Okay, ma'am," he said in a slow, deliberate drawl. "Let's just calm down for a second. Sir," he turned to me, "what's your name? Do you live here?" I gave him my name and pointed toward my cottage, hidden in the trees. "I do. That's my place right there. And this," I gestured to the half-built dock, "is the replacement for my old dock on my property." Brenda scoffed loudly. "His property? Officer, this is all common area, managed by the HOA. We all own it together. He's a tenant, and a delinquent one at that. He's refused to pay his dues and has multiple fines against him." Deputy Sutton sighed, the sound of a man who would rather be anywhere else. "Ma'am, do you have documentation for this HOA? Bylaws, deeds, that sort of thing?" "Of course," Brenda snapped, producing a ridiculously thin binder from a tote bag she had brought for the occasion. "Here are our bylaws and the list of residents and a log of his violations." She handed it over with a flourish, as if presenting the key to the city. Sutton's partner, a younger deputy, began to thumb through it with a skeptical look. This was my cue. "Officers," I said, pushing off the lumber pile and walking toward them. I was carrying my own binder, a heavy 2-inch D-ring affair that was far more substantial than Brenda's flimsy presentation folder. "Perhaps I can clear this up." Brenda looked at my binder with contempt. "More of your fake documents, I'm sure." I ignored her and opened my binder for the deputies. I didn't hand it to them. I held it, turning the pages myself like a master of ceremonies. "Gentlemen," I started, my voice steady and professional, "this is a certified copy of the original 1947 deed for this entire 300-acre parcel, showing its purchase by my great-grandfather. This is the county plat map, which designates this land as a single property, not a subdivision. These," I flipped the page, "are the articles for the family trust that has legally owned and managed this single property for the last 70 years, of which I am the current sole trustee and manager." Sutton's eyebrows went up. The younger deputy stopped looking at Brenda's bylaws and stared at my documents. Brenda's smug expression began to waver, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "And this," I continued, turning to the next tab, "is the fully executed lease agreement for the property at Lot 1. It's signed by Brenda and Richard Miller. You'll note it's a standard tenant lease, not a deed of ownership. It grants them residency in the house, but explicitly designates all land, including the lake and surrounding woodlands, as property of the trust. I tapped a highlighted paragraph. And right here, in Section 4B, it states that the lessee shall not establish any governing body or levy any fees upon other residents. In fact, by creating this so-called HOA and extorting funds from the other tenants, she is in material breach of her own lease. The silence that followed was profound. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of the lake and the distant call of a loon. Brenda's face went from pale to red to a blotchy, horrifying shade of purple. The color drained from the faces of her two allies, who took a simultaneous, subconscious step backward, as if to distance themselves from the impending explosion. Deputy Sutton looked from my binder to Brenda's face, and then back to me. A slow, slight smile touched the corner of his mouth. He'd seen it all, and he clearly recognized what was happening. "So, let me get this straight, son," he said, pointing at me. "You own all this? The whole shebang? The lake, the woods, all the land the houses are on?" "That's correct, officer," I said. "Every last square inch. These individuals," I gestured to Brenda and her crew, "are my tenants. All of them." Sutton nodded slowly, then turned his gaze entirely on Brenda. His folksy demeanor was gone, replaced by a shield of official seriousness. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat, "it appears you are the one who is trespassing. You've come off your leased parcel onto your landlord's private property to harass him while he makes improvements to his own land. And this," he tapped her flimsy binder with his finger, "is essentially a work of fiction. A potentially fraudulent one, at that, given you've been collecting money under its authority." Brenda opened and closed her mouth like a fish, but no sound came out. Her entire reality had been dismantled in 90 seconds. "So here's what's going to happen," Sutton continued, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You and your friends are going to walk back to your houses. You're going to cease all activities related to this association, effective immediately. You will not contact this gentleman again unless it's to pay your rent. And if I get another call out here about you bothering him, you'll be the one I'm citing. Do you understand me?" Her head gave a tiny, spastic nod. The war was over. The self-appointed queen had been dethroned in front of her subjects, and the law. And the best part? She had paid for the deputies to come and witness her own humiliation. It was, without a doubt, the most satisfying moment of my entire life. The immediate aftermath of the showdown was a beautiful, deafening silence. Brenda and her two cronies scurried back to their respective houses without another word. A tiny, defeated procession. The deputies gave me a nod of understanding, a look that said, "We deal with people like her all day," and left. I stood there for a moment, by my half-built dock, breathing in the quiet air. The only sound was the lake, my lake, and for the first time, it felt completely and truly mine. I didn't do any more work on the dock that day. Instead, I went back to my cottage and began drafting a new letter. Not a fine, not a violation notice, but a notice of a community meeting. My meeting. The following Saturday, I had a printed invitation delivered to each of the 10 houses, not placed in their mailboxes, but respectfully tucked into their front doors. It was a simple, professionally worded letter inviting all tenants to a gathering on the small community beach. The purpose, it stated, was to clarify the property's legal structure and management, and to discuss the future of the Clear Lake community. I ended the letter with a line I was particularly proud of. "Attendance is not mandatory, but is strongly encouraged for all who wish to have a voice in our shared environment. The Clear Lake Homeowners Aesthetics Association is hereby formally dissolved." The day of the meeting was bright and sunny. I had set up a few folding chairs and a cooler with water and sodas. Everyone came, even Brenda and Richard. They stood at the back of the small crowd, their shoulders hunched, radiating an aura of pure misery. Richard looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. Brenda's face was a stony mask, her eyes fixed on the ground. I kept it brief and to the point. I introduced myself not as their new neighbor, but as the trustee for the property. I didn't relitigate the incident with Brenda. There was no need to rub salt in the very deep, very public wound. Instead, I laid out the facts. I explained the history of the trust, how my great-grandfather had envisioned this place, and how it was legally structured. I held up a copy of the standard lease. "This document," I said, "is the only one that governs our relationship. There is no HOA. There are no bylaws. There are no aesthetic committees." A wave of quiet relief washed over the faces of Mr. Henderson and Mrs. Gable. "For decades," I continued, "this community has run on mutual respect and a hands-off approach. That is the tradition I intend to honor. My only rules are the ones in your lease. Pay your rent on time, don't damage the property, and be a decent neighbor. That's it." Then, I addressed the financial elephant in the room. "I am aware," I said carefully, "that some of you have been paying fees to a now defunct organization. I have no legal authority to compel a reimbursement from the parties who collected that money. However," I paused for effect, "I will be crediting every tenant's account for the full amount they paid in dues over the last 6 months. It will be deducted from your future rent payments." There was a collective gasp. Mr. Henderson's face broke into a wide, genuine smile. It was $1,200 back in his pocket. For some of the others, it was a significant relief. It was a gesture, but it was a powerful one. It demonstrated I was on their side. Finally, I looked toward the back of the crowd, directly at Brenda and Richard. My voice remained calm and even. "For the residents of Lot 1, I said, your current lease is in material breach. Given the circumstances, I am providing you with 2 options. Option 1. You can voluntarily terminate your lease within 60 days with no penalty, and your full security deposit will be returned upon a satisfactory inspection. Option 2. You can sign a new lease agreement, which all tenants will be offered upon their next renewal. This new lease explicitly forbids the creation of any representative bodies or the levying of fees, and contains strict clauses against tenant harassment. If you choose option 2, any future violation of these terms will result in immediate eviction proceedings. You have 1 week to inform me in writing of your decision." And with that, I closed the meeting. There was a smattering of applause. Several of the older tenants, including Mr. Henderson, came up to shake my hand, their faces filled with a gratitude that was deeply humbling. The era of Brenda's tyranny was officially over. A month later, a moving truck pulled up to Lot 1. They chose option 1. They were gone before their 60 days were up, slinking away without a goodbye. The pearl-white Lexus disappeared from the lakefront for good. In the years since, Clear Lake has become the peaceful sanctuary it was always meant to be. I finished my doc. Mr. Henderson's roses are more vibrant than ever. The community thrives on the simple principle of mutual respect. I became the accidental landlord I never thought I'd be. But in the end, protecting my great-grandfather's legacy and the quiet lives of his tenants was a project more satisfying than any I've ever engineered. And every time I paddle my canoe out on that silent, glassy water, I smile, thinking of the day the wannabe queen called the cops on her king, only to find out she was just a guest in his castle. Let that be a lesson. Before you try to start your own little kingdom, make sure you're not building it on someone else's land. Thanks for listening to my story, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales of justice served.